Hello, my little rain clouds. I wanted to talk about something that I'd been studying for a while, and something that I think is going to be quite relevant for pretty much everyone. I wanted to talk about how we respond to stress, to threats, to danger. This is going to involve some science, some anatomy, but I'm going to make it very general and accessible, so don't worry about it. Every living thing has a way of responding to danger, because if it didn't, it wouldn't be a living thing. It would be dead. We all experience danger. We all experience threats and stress. Every animal, every plant, every microbe, and especially every human. We all have ways of handling that danger and that stress. For humans, and other animals too, there are three major ways that we have to respond to situations. And typically the brain will assess the level of danger that we're experiencing, and then it will decide which mechanism of response to use. And it prefers to use the most recently developed one, evolutionarily speaking. So the one that we developed most recently in our evolution. But if that's not going to work, then it goes to the next most recent one. And if that doesn't work, it goes to the next most recent one. And if that doesn't work, it goes to the next most recent one. So, how do we respond to danger? The first system that we have, the most recent, the fanciest, the shiniest, the newest, is called the social engagement system. And probably all animals have this, but it's especially complex and developed in humans. We're very social creatures. The social engagement system happens in a variety of ways. There's lots of different areas of the brain and the nervous system that are involved, but it typically pays attention to a couple of different social things. It looks at someone's body language. It looks at their facial expression. It listens to their tone of voice. And it listens to the words that they use. And so we do these things. We monitor these things to assess what someone's deal is, what their emotional state is, if they seem safe or dangerous. And we use that information to negotiate a relationship with them. Naturally, we don't need to be in a deep, meaningful relationship with them. They could be strangers on the street, but we are still interrelating with them. So, we pay attention to these social cues, and we determine if they're safe, if they're not safe, what kind of mood they're in, what we need to do to navigate our interaction with them. And we will also use our own social cues. So we will maybe alter our body language or our facial expression. We might use our tone of voice and the words that we have. We will communicate with them to try and solve whatever problem or get what we need from them or have some kind of a successful interaction with them. And we tend to do this when we're safe. If we view the situation as being pretty safe, then we'll use the social engagement system. But if it's not safe, then our brain goes, probably not the social engagement system. Let's go to the next one. So, for example, if we're walking down a path and there's someone in the way, we will read their body language and their facial expression and their tone of voice and their words, if they talk to us, and we'll try and determine, are they safe? Are they unsafe? Do they look happy? Do they look angry, aggressive? Do they look scared? How should I be feeling in response to this? And so if we want them to move out of the way, our brain will do some calculations and think, yeah, they look pretty safe and open and friendly, so we can probably just approach them and politely ask them to get out of the way. Or maybe they look really angry and aggressive and scary, and then we think, maybe we won't go and talk to them. Maybe we'll find another way around. Or maybe we will talk to them, but we need to take a gentle approach. We need to be very friendly and calming to try and soothe them, bring them down from that aggressive state. And so we might adopt very open, peaceful body language. We might raise our palms, raise our hands, palms out to show that we don't have a weapon, that we're not planning to attack them. And we may walk very slowly, very casually. We might put a smile on our face. And we might use a very soft, gentle tone of voice. We might use modulation in our voice, going up and then down like that. And that tends to be very calming and soothing. So, hi there. You're standing on the path and I'd like to get by. Would you be all right to just step off to the side? Thank you so much. Something like that might help to diffuse the situation and make them friendly, receptive towards us. We might be able to successfully navigate that situation. But maybe we don't successfully navigate it and the person gets angry and starts attacking us. Or maybe instead of just a person standing on the path, it's a person with a sword and they're pointing it at us. And then our brain might go, ooh, I don't like the look of that. That's not safe. Social engagement system, that's not going to work. We need something else. And so we might feel afraid. We might notice that they have a weapon and our brain might go, ooh, this seems dangerous. Let's get fear up in the mix, and that may motivate us to avoid the danger. So instead of talking to that person, it might activate our fight or flight response. The second way that we have to respond to something we perceive as dangerous, but not necessarily life-threateningly dangerous. So if we engage the fight or flight response, we may have feelings like fear or aggression that motivate us to take certain kinds of actions. In the case of fear, we might run away, flight. Or if we are feeling aggressive or defensive, maybe we'll attack, fight. Regardless of our plan of action, our body responds the same way. It pumps us up, full of energy. We become hyper-aroused. Arousal here doesn't mean sexual. It means that our emotions are very charged, very powerful, and we become much more alert and active. And so we might run away or we might fight. Typically, flight means running away from the danger, and fight means running towards it and doing something. It doesn't necessarily mean getting into an actual fight with punching and kicking. It might just mean running towards the problem and dealing with it, like, say, lifting a car off someone who's trapped underneath it, or lifting a car off ourselves if we're trapped. That is one example of a fight response. Typically, if we're in that kind of response where we are experiencing danger, we don't like ambiguity. We don't like unknowns. We like things to be definite, and we think in very black and white terms. And so, for example, if we see a man on a path holding a sword and he's wearing a mask, we can't see his face, we can't see his facial expression or his intent. We're probably going to interpret him as unsafe, as dangerous. We can't see his intent, but our brain's going to go, it's negative. Because we're already in a negative mindset. We've seen the sword, it's dangerous, he's dangerous. He could be smiling underneath the mask. He might be very friendly and just joking around, but we can't see that. So our brain is going to make an assumption based on the limited information it has, and it's going to prioritize things being dangerous so that it can make itself safe. Because better safe than sorry. So we're probably going to interpret that as a dangerous situation, and more than likely we're going to run away. Because we don't have any particular reason, at this stage at least, to fight. Although, if we need to, we can switch from flight to fight and back and forth if necessary. So if, for example, we run and then the man with the sword chases after us and he traps us in an alleyway, then we may have no choice but to fight. So we may fight for a little while and then we spot an opening and we run away again. Totally okay. We can absolutely switch it up between the two. So the emotion of fear is a really good, helpful emotion in moderation and where appropriate, because it motivates us to avoid danger. And avoiding danger is a very good thing for our survival. Fear was really great because a lot of our dangers were, predators, dangerous animals, bushfires, rival tribes, things like that. And so running away is a practical solution to that problem. But nowadays, a lot of our problems can't really be run away from. Sure, we get in the odd dangerous situation where running away is helpful, but a lot of our daily stresses are things that we can't run away from or even fight, really. So the stress response that we experience may not always be super helpful in modern day society. There are also plenty of situations, even back then, where running away or fighting isn't really a valid option, particularly if we perceive very, very life-threatening danger, something we're probably not going to be able to handle by fighting it or running away. In that case, the brain again goes, I don't think that response is going to be helpful here. And so it goes to an even older danger response that we have called the freeze response or the immobilisation response. And in this response, instead of getting pumped up with lots of energy, we're brought down. Everything slows down. We tend to get very still and very quiet. We don't move much. And so when we're in this response, it can be helpful for lots of different things. For example, we become very good at hiding because we're still, we're quiet. We're not making noise, we're not moving around, so we're less likely to get spotted. And this is obviously really helpful for hiding from predators and things like that. We also can reduce the amount of threat that we present. So if an animal is territorial or aggressive, they may think that, we're challenging them, that we're encroaching on their territory, that we're provoking them in some way. And so if we can go, hey, no, everything's fine. I'm not a threat. You don't need to attack me. It's all fine. Then they might leave us alone. So being able to reduce threat is good like that too. And then there's also enduring a threat. If we can't run away and we can't fight back, like say we're trapped in a cave with a bear, then we might just have to endure it. The bear might claw us a whole bunch and do lots of damage to us, but it might not kill us, in which case we might just be able to kind of wait it out, and hopefully things will eventually get better. So the immobilization response helps us do that too. We can do something called dissociation, where our mind kind of checks out of our body, and when that happens, we don't really feel or experience things as much. We're sort of there, but not really there. Some people experience an out-of-body experience where they're kind of hovering above their bodies and just kind of watching things happen to them, but they don't really experience them. And this can be helpful. So in the example where you're being clawed by a bear, you don't really need to feel all the pain, because pain typically alerts you to damage sustained by your body, and it's like, hey, stop doing that thing. But in this case, we know, we're aware that our body is being damaged, and we can't really do anything about it, so we don't need the pain. It's not going to serve us any purpose. And in fact, even after the attack, the pain's not really going to help us, because it's like, yeah, I know my body is really, really badly damaged. I actually need to crawl to safety and stuff, and the pain is stopping me from doing that. So we may go into what's called a shock response, where we don't really feel anything. I see this a lot with people who have been shot. They kind of go into shock and they don't actually feel the pain. They may not even notice that they've been shot. So enduring things can be a valid response. We get spared at least some of the physical pain and also the emotional trauma of experiencing something really unpleasant. The body kind of goes, you're okay, I got this, just check out for a while. And that can be really helpful. It's also really helpful even if we don't survive. If something is life-threateningly dangerous, we may just need to prepare for death. We may not get out of it alive. In which case, again, it's kind of nice that the body can just go, you check out. I'll spare you the gory details. You don't need to experience this. It's kind of a consolation prize if we do end up dying from some horrible traumatic thing. We don't really experience it. We just kind of check out. And it's not great, but at least it's like more pleasant than experiencing being clawed to death, I guess. But there's also another really helpful thing that the immobilization response can do. And this is called playing dead. And you see this a lot in the animal kingdom. Playing possum, you might have heard of. Deer in the headlights, not so positive. Even animals like fainting goats. There is a response where the body just kind of shuts down and it looks like you're dead. But you're not. At least, not yet. And so playing dead can actually be a really, really helpful strategy of getting out of a situation that you otherwise couldn't. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you're a gazelle in the savannah of Africa and you hear a lion roar and you've got a memory of lions roaring in the past and you've seen other gazelle have this danger response and they've looked scared. And so you remember that and you go, oh, right. My friends were scared, and that made me scared. So I've associated this memory, this sound, with being scared. So now I'm scared, and being scared makes me want to run away. So I go into a fight or flight response, and I run away. And I'm safe, and it's all good. But let's say you're drinking at the watering hole later on, and suddenly there's a cheetah racing towards you. It's really close. And you can't run from a cheetah. It's way faster than you. And you certainly can't fight a cheetah. And so what are you going to do? The social engagement system's not going to work. Fight or flight's not going to work. Maybe immobilization can work. The cheetah lunges at you. It's leaping through the air. It's about to claw and bite at you. And your brain goes, immobilize. And so you freeze up and you collapse over. And the cheetah's like, cool, I killed it, I guess. And so you're okay. You're alive. You didn't actually get clawed. The cheetah might be a little confused, but maybe you died of fright. Maybe it hit you and it just thought it didn't. Who knows? The point is, you're alive. And the cheetah's like, all right, sweet. I've got a fresh gazelle that I can drag under some shady tree and then go get my little cheetah cubs and bring them back here and we'll chow down on this nice fresh gazelle. Sweet. And so it saunters off to go get its cubs and you're underneath a shady tree. You're collapsed, dissociated from your body in case you did get killed. But maybe, sensing that you're kind of safe now, your mind might be able to come back into your body. You might be able to wake up and you look around and you think, now's my chance. And you bolt for it. You run. You run as fast as you can to get out of there. And you survive. You come out of the immobilization response. You go into a fight or flight response and run until you get to safety. And then hopefully you find some of your gazelle buddies and they're happily playing and laughing and smiling and doing whatever safe gazelles do. And then you go, now I'm safe. My social engagement system's kicking back in. I'm looking around at friendly gazelle. They're safe. They're feeling safe. They're expressing safety. That means I'm safe. Great. You survived. Your systems did what they needed to do. And if they didn't do what they needed to do, then at least you're spared the gory details of a death by cheetah. But playing dead can be really, really helpful. Likewise, enduring an onslaught, a horrible experience that you can't escape from, very helpful. Hiding from someone, very helpful. Reducing the amount of threat you present, very helpful. The immobilization response is valid. It is a legitimate response. Unfortunately, a lot of people in society don't know about this. We know about fight or flight. We celebrate people who fight. We think of them as heroes. We tolerate people who flight. We tolerate people who run away. It's maybe not the most heroic thing, but it's understandable. But a lot of people don't know about freeze. They don't know about immobilization. And so, unfortunately, a lot of people who go through horrible traumatic things are blamed for it. They're victims, and yet they get blamed. This is called victim blaming. And so they're told by people, well, why didn't you do anything? I would have done this if I were in your situation. Not realizing you did do something. Your body went into the freeze response. It's a protective response. It's like encasing yourself in ice, turning your skin to stone. You are protecting yourself in the only way that your brain thinks is going to work. It didn't think that talking things out was going to work. It didn't think that running away or fighting was going to work. So it just went to the freeze response. And it's a helpful response. It's helped us get through a lot of dangerous things. Another important thing to recognize about this is that you don't have a choice. Your brain does not consult you on this. The part of the brain that handles this stress response is a more primitive part, a part that we developed early on as animals. The more complex human parts, the parts that are all about logic and reasoning and speech and forward planning and things like that, they're all in the front and the top of the brain. This is the part of the brain called the frontal cortex or the prefrontal cortex. And these are the fancy nerd stuff that we have, like being able to plan for the future and being able to regulate our emotions. If we're angry, we might be able to say, well, no, let's not actually fly off the handle and attack someone just because we're angry. We'll be able to apply logic. We'll be able to apply reasoning. We'll be able to use language, all that kind of stuff. Those parts came much later in our evolution. The parts that deal with survival, that deal with eating, drinking, and danger response, and all that kind of stuff, the stuff that all animals have, they are at the back of the brain and the bottom of the brain. This sometimes is called the lizard brain or the animal brain, the more simplistic part, the part that doesn't have to deal with all that nerd stuff where you think about things, and instead it's just about surviving. It's about doing things. This part of the brain is involved in assessing the threat that we're experiencing and also responding to it. Your top front part, the nerd part, is not consulted. Because if you are in an emergency, you don't have time to send a message up to the eggheads in the ivory tower and consulting them, having them form a committee and vote on a response. You need to act now, or you might be dead. You might not have time to choose the optimal plan, the best response. You might not be able to think about it. You just need to act. And the threat assessment part of your brain, it performs something called neuroception. Perception is what we're used to, where we get sensory information and then it gets circulated around the brain, and then we can think about it and recognize things and go, oh, that's my friend Jeff, and Jeff has a newborn baby, and I'll formulate a response of what to say to Jeff, and I'll talk to him and congratulate him on his baby and blah, blah, blah. And then maybe I'll organize something for the future where I get to spend time with Jeff. That's the front part of the brain, the top part, the nerd part. The bottom part doesn't perceive things. It neuroceives them. It has neuroception. We receive sensory input from our eyes and our ears and, all those other parts. We get sensory information and it comes into our brain. And before it gets passed up to the nerds and they handle it, it gets scanned. Like the security guards at an airport or a fancy building with a metal detector. All that information gets scanned by the hippocampus. That's the part of the brain responsible for memory. And it gets looked at and compared to see, does this remind me of any danger? Is this something that I have emotionally charged memories about? Something that I feel really afraid or aggressive about, really in danger? And if it doesn't remind us of any danger, then that's fine. We can pass that information to the eggheads upstairs. They can make their nerd plans and look at the future and talk with language and blah, blah, blah. And that's called perception, right? Perception, we perceive things, we take in sensory information and we pass it along to our fancy brain. But if it does remind us of danger, then we pass along a message to a part of the brain called the amygdala. This is responsible for fear, amongst other things. And so the amygdala rings the alarm bell and says, danger, danger, we need to go into a danger response. And so it passes a message over to a part of the brain called the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is kind of like the thermostat of the body. It's a bit like a puppet master. It's pulling all the strings, it's arranging all of the systems that we have in place in our body, and it wants to keep things at a nice, stable level called homeostasis, where our blood pressure's good, our breathing is nice and steady, our heart rate's fine, energy levels are fine. If something gets too low, it brings it back up. If it gets too high, it brings it back down. It wants to keep us nice and comfortable. But when it gets this alarm response from the amygdala, it goes, oh God, we got to go into battle stations. We got to respond to a threat. And so if we have to go into the fight or flight response, then it activates the sympathetic nervous system and it pumps us up full of energy. It raises our heart rate. It increases the rate that we breathe. It increases our blood pressure. It releases some stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. And it redirects blood from our digestive system and our immune system into our muscles so that we can do things. Because we don't care about what's going to happen in a few hours from now when we're digesting food or maybe getting sick. We care about what's happening now because we might not be alive to deal with that stuff later if we don't have power to the muscles right now to run away or fight something. And so we get into this stress response and we're given the energy that we need to respond to something. And then hopefully, once we've responded to it by running away or fighting, then we can start to come back down. We'll hopefully get into a state where we feel safe. We'll have burned off that energy of the fight or flight response, and then we'll gradually start to calm down. Our breathing will slow down, heart rate lowers, blood pressure lowers, etc. The blood will go back to our digestive system and our immune system, and hopefully mission will be accomplished. Alternatively, if we need to go into a freeze response, then our hypothalamus activates the parasympathetic nervous system and it slows us right down. Lowers our heart rate, lowers the blood pressure, slows down the breathing, and we kind of freeze up. And hopefully the situation improves. Hopefully things are fine and we get into a position of safety and we feel safe again, in which case we can generally start to lift those things back up and we'll come out of the freeze response. And typically when we come out of the freeze response, we go into the fight or flight response, at least for a little while, because maybe we got dragged under a tree and we were playing dead and now we run away, or we were playing dead and then we surprise fight someone, or who knows. But typically, after we come out of the freeze response, we go into the fight or flight response and we have a surge of energy. And so if you come out of the freeze response, you may go into the fight or flight response and you may need to burn off that energy. Even if you don't actually need to run away or fight something, you may still feel like you do. So you might need to run on the spot, or you might need to punch a pillow or something. And then hopefully, after we've dissipated that energy, we can gradually start to calm down again. Usually it takes us about 10 or 20 minutes to sort of fully come back down to our stable state, to reach homeostasis again. But that varies. And it varies on the situation. And it's often really helped if we're around safe people. If we're getting social cues of safety, then our social engagement system kicks in and goes, oh yeah, I guess we're safe. Here's some nice happy chemicals to make us feel good, and we feel safe, and we're starting to undo all of the stress response stuff. It's all fine. And that's one of the reasons that people enjoy ASMR videos. That's because there is very gentle body language and happy facial expressions and a nice modulating voice going up and down, and everything is safe, and there's nice soothing words being said, and so it makes people feel safe, and that's great. But sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes the danger doesn't stop, or people don't feel like the danger has stopped. Sometimes they go through a traumatic experience, something stressful or dangerous, and they don't get closure. They don't get to calm down. They don't have that feeling of safety around safe people, or maybe the danger has gone on so long that they become accustomed to it, that their brain doesn't accept that the danger is over. They've become conditioned to feeling like they're in danger. There can be lots of reasons how and why this happens, but typically, when this does happen, it's termed PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. After something traumatic, our stress systems don't come back up to normal. We don't feel safe. And so we might be locked in an ongoing stress response. We still feel like we're in danger, and we're still stuck in freeze or flight or fight mode. And so people can be really on edge, hypervigilant. They can be looking around for danger. They can jump at small noises. They can feel constantly like they are in danger. And it makes it really hard to sleep, and it makes it really hard to function. It makes it really tough. Alternatively, they might be in the freeze response and they might be dissociating a lot. Their mind might just check out. They can't concentrate on stuff. They're kind of here one moment and gone another. There can be lots of different ways that these kind of conditions present. But it can be really, really distressing and really tough. It is possible to get better. It is possible to work on that. Social cues of safety are a big one. Surrounding yourself with people who feel safe and who make you feel safe is really important. There's something that happens in the stress response that can contribute to this. You might remember when I was mentioning about the fight or flight response, there's stress hormones that get released, adrenaline and cortisol. You might have heard of these before. Cortisol is a helpful stress hormone. It sends messages all around the body, and it makes lots of important things happen in response to a threat. It helps you deal with it. But one of the things that cortisol also does is that it impairs the functioning of certain parts of the brain. It doesn't stop them, doesn't shut them down, but it makes them not work as well. And part of that involves impairing the function of the top front part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, the nerd part. That part doesn't tend to work as well when we feel like we're in danger, when we are having a stress response. If we're in fight or flight or freeze, we typically don't think things through as much. We're not as coherent, we're not as logical, we can't speak as eloquently, we might not be able to speak at all. Typically, when we have that stress response, cortisol interferes with that part of the brain, and so we aren't able to do all of that stuff, including emotional regulation. So if you're freaking out, if you're feeling aggressive, if you're feeling afraid, you might not be able to stop yourself from doing whatever it is that you feel like doing in response to those feelings. And so people who are stuck in that response, who are having PTSD, may be kind of volatile. They may get angry or aggressive for no reason, or they may just get really afraid for seemingly no reason. That doesn't mean that they're a danger to you. You don't need to worry about that, but it is really distressing for them, and it can make things really tough for them. One of the other parts of the brain that gets affected by cortisol sometimes is the hippocampus, which is the part responsible for memory. So if you have a very traumatic experience, your memory of that traumatic experience might not be like a normal memory. And this can be a good thing. Like I was talking about with the gazelle, it might store an emotionally charged memory of, let's say, a lion roaring, and it will have a fear response to that memory. And so when it hears a lion roaring, it will go, oh God, that's scary. I'm going to run away. But nowadays, with the kinds of experiences that we have, that's not necessarily so helpful, and the system may not work so well. See, when the hippocampus, the memory center of the brain, is impaired by cortisol, it stores memories differently than it usually does. It tends to store very, very vivid sensory information. You can recall that sensory information with perfect clarity. You can feel it like it's happening again. But it's missing a couple of other key things that most memories usually have. It's missing context, and it's missing temporal order, which means it's missing what that memory means and when it happened in time. So, for example, let's say that you're in a car accident and it's very traumatic and you get very scared and you have some very precise memory fragments afterwards. You don't remember the whole experience. You may have been dissociating or just focusing on particular things. You were in a stress response and your brain was impaired, but you do remember very particular fragments of memories. So you might remember feeling a sharp pain in your side, and you remember seeing flashing lights, and you remember the sound of glass breaking, and you remember the sound of someone screaming, and you remember the smell of gasoline. But you don't remember the order that they happened in. Did the glass break before the person was screaming or after? I can't remember. I cannot tell you. My brain literally does not have that information. If I heard the scream again, I could tell you 100% that it was that scream, but I can't tell you when that happened. And I also can't tell you who was screaming. Might have been me, might have been a voice on the radio, might have been a passenger in the car, or a passenger in the other car that hit us, or a person on the street. I do not know whose scream it was. I don't have context, but I can definitely recall that sound. And if I hear it again, I will know. And it will take me back to that memory as though I am experiencing it again. And this is how triggers work. If you smell gasoline, it might be in a completely innocuous, safe environment. You might just be at a petrol station. But if you smell that smell, it may trigger your hippocampus to go, danger, I recognize that sense memory and I have a strong emotion associated with it. That is dangerous. We need to go into a stress response. Obviously, you're not in danger. You're safe. But your brain doesn't recognize that because it's not waiting for the eggheads in their ivory tower to tell you with reason and logic what's happening. It is a more primal, instinctual part of your brain that's going, I recognize that. I have a memory associated with danger, and when I associate things with danger, I go into this stress response. And this happens way, 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 way faster than your nerd brain getting that information. The connections in those more primitive, early parts of your brain, the more lizard brain parts, they are much, much faster and more efficient than the parts of your brain that connect to the prefrontal cortex. That's new ground. They're not well-trodden paths as much as the survival mechanisms. They're closer together, they're better connections, and they're also more important because they're related to your survival. So that brain activity happens much, much faster than your prefrontal cortex getting information and doing its fancy nerd stuff with it. And we see this. Someone can have a stress response and act on it before they consciously think about it. It's almost like a spider sense from Spider-Man. People can dodge out of the way of an oncoming car before they even recognize that there was a car there. Their brain just goes, oh, danger, run now, move, dive out of the way. And they'll do that before the nerd part of your brain is like, there's a car coming. That's probably not good. You've already dodged out of the way. So if you have a sense memory associated with a traumatic, dangerous event, and then you re-experience that sensory experience, whatever it is, it could be a touch, it could be a sight or a sound or a taste or a smell. When you experience that, your brain goes into danger mode. It just responds to danger way faster than your nerd brain can go, yeah, but it's unrelated. We're just smelling gasoline because we're at a petrol station. That's fine. We're not in that car accident. We're not in danger. We don't need to go to a stress response. Already done. Way too late. And so you can eventually start to calm down and be reassured of your safety. You may be able to do this by yourself. It certainly helps if you have other people around you who are safe and sympathetic and calming and comforting. But you can help yourself calm down too. But the fact of the matter is you can't avoid it. It's already done. By the time that you can consciously think about it and recognize it, you are already going into that danger response. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about PTSD triggers and anxiety triggers. If someone was in a war zone and they heard lots of gunshots and it was really scary and stressful and they went into fight or flight mode, then whenever they hear similar sounds like fireworks exploding, that may remind them of the guns and the bombs that they experienced in the war zone. And so their brain is going, I recognize that. It's dangerous. We need to go into a danger response. And so they go into that danger response. They don't choose to. It's not something they have any conscious control over. It's something that their brain and their body automatically does. They don't ask questions. They don't consult the nerds up in their ivory tower. You don't get to make a conscious decision about it. It just happens. It's like some dust going up your nose and you just sneeze reflexively, instinctively. You don't get to control it. You can put your hand over your nose, you can try and catch the sneeze, you can try and stop yourself, but it's going to happen regardless. Same with a stress response. If you have PTSD, you get triggered by stuff that is related to your trauma. And it reminds you of those very, very emotionally charged memories, and it brings you back to that experience. It's like you are experiencing the thing again. And if you get triggered, your mind goes back to those memories as though you're re-experiencing it. It may be like you dissociated into the trauma rather than out of it, like you did initially. And it's also important to recognize that you can't stop this easily. Once you've been triggered, once you go into that stress response, it can be very difficult to stop. It can be very difficult to come out of that traumatic memory. Even if people are telling you that you're not there and that you're safe, it can be tough. Particularly if someone is yelling at you to calm down or they're making fun of you or something like that. It is not helpful at all. If you've been triggered and you're in that stress response and you're experiencing those memories, it's also really tough to get out of it because your memories aren't time-stamped the way that they normally are. So normally when you remember things, you can go, oh yeah, I went to the grocery store and I bought this and this and that. And then I went to the checkout and I paid with my credit card. And then I went out to my car and I put my shopping in and I drove home and I saw a dog on the way and I got 3 red lights and it was very frustrating. And then I took out all the shopping and put it in the fridge and then I watched TV for half an hour. And you know the order of things and how they happened, and you know that there's an end to that grocery store memory because you went home and then you watched some TV. But with a traumatic memory, you don't have those timestamps, and you don't know what happened first and what happened last and what happened afterwards. And so when you're stuck in that memory, it doesn't have a signpost pointing to the end. It doesn't help you go, oh yeah, that experience is over because I did this and this and this and then I'm here. So your brain can potentially get tricked into thinking that it is still happening, that you are still in that dangerous situation, that it did not end. And that is very distressing as well. And because it's happening in your lower brain, in the more primitive parts of your brain, it's not something that easily responds to logic, because logic came later. Logic is the stuff that we advanced humans developed much, much later than any of these responses. So they don't respond well to logic. Even if you have a perfectly sound, logical explanation for everything that happened and why everything is safe, you might still feel in danger. And that's not your fault. And it's not a weakness. And it's not your fault how you responded to the danger. Because again, it's not under your control. You are not consulted about it. If you go into the freeze response, it is not your fault. Your brain did the best it could based on the information it had. It made a decision about how best to respond to that danger, and it did it. And if you're still here, then presumably it at least did okay. You're still alive. So that's something. The point is, regardless of how your brain responds, it is not your fault. If your friend Dave jumps out from behind a tree while you're just walking down the street and he startles you, and you go into fight or flight response and you punch him in the face because he startled you and you just respond to a threat, that's not your fault. Maybe Dave shouldn't have jumped out from that tree and tried to scare you. It's not your fault for getting startled. It's not your fault for feeling in danger. It's not your fault for responding with a fight and punching him in the face. That's an automatic thing. Your brain just did it. It did not consult you. You don't need to feel guilty about that. Dave needs to feel guilty about that. He shouldn't have jumped out. It's also important to recognize that the more we go into the extreme danger responses, the more we tend to feel in danger. We tend to think in terms of black and white. We tend to look for things that are dangerous. We tend to make assumptions that things are dangerous. And we tend to drop into that response quicker and easier. This is particularly true if you suffer from PTSD and you are stuck in a stress response. You will tend to perceive things as dangerous and respond to them as though they are dangerous, even if they aren't. But the more that you tend to go into those stress responses, particularly the immobilisation response, the more likely you are to kind of default to that. The brain gets accustomed to being in danger, and so it will go into that danger response quicker and easier and more automatically. And you may get more false positives as a response. You may go into that danger response when you're not actually in danger and you don't need to freeze up. And so people with PTSD or anxiety will often tend to go into that freeze response more, and that kind of perpetuates itself. It becomes like a snowball effect where you get more and more scared and you go into the freeze response, and then you often feel less confident and capable of handling yourself. You may start feeling weaker and more fragile and scared all the time, which makes you go into the freeze response more because you perceive danger more. So it can be a vicious cycle. But it is possible to work on that. You can absolutely work on that, and you can learn how to better manage your stress responses and to bring yourself out of the false positive ones when you get into a stress response that you don't need to. and you can learn how to make yourself feel safe and keep yourself safe, and you can surround yourself with safe people who make you feel safe. I would highly recommend that if you struggle with this, talk to a therapist, particularly one who specializes in trauma. Even if you don't think that you have experienced trauma, you might have. A lot of the time, we don't remember the trauma terribly well because our memory center wasn't working very well thanks to the stress response. And sometimes this can be a protective factor. Sometimes we don't have the memory because it is traumatic, and so we might bury that. The brain goes, we'll deal with that later when you're safe. But it might still be affecting you, and it's good to try and deal with that. Even if you haven't experienced trauma, even if you don't struggle with this regularly, it can still be helpful to have better ways of dealing with the stress response, particularly if you're prone to acting in violent or aggressive ways. Breathing exercises is a really good way of trying to deal with that. Meditation, qigong, tai chi, those sorts of things can help, but also just breathing by itself. Taking long, slow, deep breaths, breathing deeper, lower in your chest, not up high, tends to help us be calm. When we're in a stress response, we tend to take short, sharp, shallow breaths. We tend to breathe more rapidly when we're in the fight or flight response mode. And so slowing down the breath and breathing deeply tends to help our body go, oh, I guess we're safe now because we're not breathing in a panicky kind of way. And long exhales, exhaling for longer than you do inhale, also tends to calm us down and activate the social engagement system. That's why some people enjoy playing musical instruments like the clarinet and things like that too. It can be very calming. Taking deep breaths in and then long, slow exhales out can be very helpful. Body awareness too, concentrating on your body, feeling stress and tension in your body, relaxing muscles, scanning your body with meditation and things. Yoga, all sorts of exercise can be very helpful too. And likewise, if you need to burn off excess energy from stress responses, then, running, exercising, boxing, all sorts of things can be helpful for that too. It's important to burn off the energy of that stress response. And typically when we do come down from a stress response, we tend to be pretty exhausted because our body's been burning a lot of energy. Even if we do go into the freeze response, we'll eventually come back out into the fight or flight response, and we'll burn a lot of energy so that we have available energy for our body to do whatever it needs to do. So after we've built up that energy, even if we haven't used it, we then need to crash. We need to calm back down and we need to recharge and recover. And the longer we stay in that stress response, the more exhausted we tend to be. Ideally, we just stay in it for a few minutes, maybe half an hour at most, and then hopefully we're not dealing with the problem anymore. We've outrun it or we've fought it off or whatever, and we're safe. But if it's a particularly long, dangerous experience, or we have PTSD and the danger never seems to end, so we stay in that stress response, then we're obviously going to burn a lot of energy and we're going to be really exhausted. So if you do have a stress response, give yourself time to recover afterwards. Preferably don't have any strenuous or stressful or draining activities on afterwards. Give yourself time to rest and recover, at least for a day or two. If you do have PTSD, it's possible to overcome it, but it takes time and effort and working with a qualified therapist. It's not something that you should do on your own. If at all possible, see a therapist and work with them. And if you know anyone with PTSD, maybe you'll be more mindful of their triggers and their experience and how to help them feel safe. Using calming, safe body language, tone of voice that's modulated, helping them to feel safe, and just being with them, not judging them, not making them feel silly, reminding them that their body's just doing what it thinks it needs to do, to keep them safe, and that it's okay, and that you're not going to shame them. And try to remember, when someone freezes up, it's not their fault, and it's not their choice. We don't need to blame victims. They've been through enough already. Try to have compassion for when someone has suffered something traumatic or stressful. We all deserve that kindness and compassion from ourselves and from others. Until next time, bye-bye.